Rejected by her kingdom, the young orc queen hid her tears behind a smile. The first thing Kale noticed when he woke up was that the ceiling was wrong. Not wrong in the way a ceiling could be cracked or stained or in need of paint. Wrong in a deeper, stranger way, wrong like a word you've said too many times until it stops sounding like a word at all. He stared at it for a long moment, his mind turning like a wheel that had forgotten the road it was supposed to be on. And then the pain came back in a slow tide, and he stopped noticing the ceiling and started noticing everything else. Tubes, the cool antiseptic smell of a medical bay, the low hum of machines that monitored the body he was, apparently, still in possession of. He raised one hand, he told himself his hand, and held it in front of his face, and for just a moment he couldn't quite remember what his hands looked like. The fingers were long, the knuckles scarred from 1,000 hours working the undercarriage of racing sleds. That was right. That was him. He let out a breath and closed his eyes. The Valkai homeworld was a cold place, and the medical facilities they kept in the northern treatment centers were colder still. Dr. Avin Sorathi had been working for 17 years in the clinic, long enough to understand that the machines were more comfortable at low temperatures, that the alien neural matrix they used to stabilize patients ran cleaner below a certain threshold, and that the cold also kept families from lingering too long. She had not become a doctor because she liked people. She had become one because she could not abide waste, and a body dying for lack of knowledge was the most wasteful thing she could imagine. She stood in the observation room above the recovery ward and watched the young man, the young human, stir for the first time in 6 days. "He's awake," said Costet from behind her, without looking up from his tablet. He said it the way you'd say the weather had changed, as though it weren't extraordinary, as though what they had done in that operating theater 4 days ago were a routine thing, a thing one simply did on a Tuesday and then logged in a database. Sorathi said nothing. She watched the human's hand rise and fall. She watched the particular stillness that came over a person when they were trying to figure out whether they were still the same person they'd been before. She had seen that stillness before, in patients recovering from injury, from illness, from the kind of surgery that left scars on the inside. She had never expected to see it in someone who had, in the technical sense, died and been given someone else's reason to live. Behind her, the door opened. Marion came in without knocking. She always came in without knocking. "How is he?" she asked. She was young, 22, maybe 23, with the kind of quiet intensity that certain people develop when they have grown up watching a brilliant parent perform miracles and have decided, without ever quite saying it aloud, that they will outshine them. She stood at the glass and looked down at the figure in the bed below. Something moved in her face that Sorathi couldn't name. "He's awake. Beyond that we don't know yet. He's the memory integration, the neural. We'll run the assessments when he's stabilized." Sorathi turned away from the glass. "Go home, Marion." "He was my father." "He was. The man in that bed is something else, something new." She paused at the door. "That isn't a bad thing. It's just a fact." She left Marion standing at the glass, and behind the glass, Kale lay in his bed and stared at the wrong ceiling and tried to remember his own name. He remembered the crash first. This seemed appropriate since the crash was the last coherent thing that had happened to him. The crash was clear. The sled, the ice track, the other racer cutting inside on the final turn of the Valdres Cup, the sound of metal on metal like a sentence interrupted in the middle, and then a different kind of silence. He remembered the cold. He remembered thinking, with the particular clarity that arrives in the moment before catastrophe, that he had left his lucky patch unsewn on his jacket that morning, and that this probably meant something. He had not expected to wake up. His name was Cale Eckhart. He was 23 years old, a test pilot for the Drevin Racing Corp, formerly ranked 7th in the Pan-System sled circuit. He had a mother on Drevin Station and a half-finished bottle of Vethian whiskey in his locker and a cat named Smudge who, it occurred to him now with a small private horror, had not been fed in at least a week. These were the facts of himself that he checked through now, one by one, like a mechanic running down a pre-flight list. Then the other memories came. They came like something bleeding through a wall, soft at first, then insistent. A young woman's name, Marion, the particular weight of a winter coat taken off at a doorway, a melody Brahmsian played on some kind of string instrument he had no memory of learning to love. An office at the end of a long corridor, the desk covered in research notes, the window looking out over a snowfield. The way a scalpel felt in the hand when the hand was very sure of itself. He pressed the heels of his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. "Good," said a voice. "Pressure response is intact." He took his hands away. A Valkai woman was standing at the foot of his bed, holding a data slate and watching him with the expression of someone who has been paid to be professional and is succeeding at it through extraordinary personal effort. She had the gray-green skin, the flat-bridged nose, the faintly luminescent eyes of her kind. She was, he guessed, somewhere in the human equivalent of her mid-40s. She looked like she had not slept since before he arrived. "I'm Dr. Sorathi," she said. "You are Cale Eckhart, registered pilot, age 23, transferred to this facility 6 days ago following a severe crash during qualifying trials at the Valdres Ice Circuit." She said it like a recitation, like she was reminding him and also reminding herself. "I know," he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "Can I have some water?" She poured it herself, which surprised him. She waited while he drank it, watching the mechanics of his throat with clinical attention. "The other memories," he said when the water was gone, "they're not mine." "No. They're real, though." A pause. They were real. They belonged to someone who is no longer here to use them. He set the cup down. He found that he was not afraid, which surprised him more than anything else had. He felt something more complicated than fear, a kind of weight, a sense of having been trusted with something he had not asked for and could not return. "Tell me about him," he said. She told him. Professor Taryn Marcelli had been, by any measure, the most gifted neural surgeon in the Valkai hegemony. 17 years of research, 5 breakthrough procedures, a clinic named in his honor. He had also been dying quietly, methodically, in the way that brilliant people sometimes die, as though even at the end they cannot help organizing themselves, of a degenerative cardiac condition that no amount of surgical genius could reverse. The accident at the Valdres circuit had given him an option. He pushed Desagnac hard on the ethics, Sorathi said. She was sitting now at the chair beside the bed, which she had not sat in during any of their previous conversations. Something about his stillness seemed to make her less guarded. Desagnac is the neural surgeon who performed the procedure. Taryn had trained him. That made it harder to say no, I think, when a man you admire tells you he will die without you, and that a young man who is already brain dead will live if you act. "Was I brain dead?" Cale asked. "You were very nearly. The distinction," she said carefully, "was close enough that it required judgment." He absorbed this, and the judgment was made. It was. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, there was a window, he noticed now, filled with the gray light of a northern afternoon. Something was moving. A machine on the landing platform. A maintenance drone circling in slow, patient loops. His wife, Cale said. He wasn't sure how he knew this. The memory had arrived without a label, soft and certain as a familiar smell. She came here. Sorathi did not look surprised that he knew. Helena, yes, she arrived 2 days ago. She stood in the corridor outside this room for 40 minutes, and then left without coming in. Now Sorathi did look at him differently. "How do you know that?" "I don't know how I know." He paused. "Is she still in the building?" A very long silence. Outside, the drone made another loop. "Yes," said Sorathi. "She is." Helena Marcelli was 41 years old, and she wore grief the way certain people wore expensive clothes, with such ease that you couldn't quite tell whether it was natural or practiced. She was Terran by birth, which made her one of the two humans in the building, a fact that was not lost on either of them when they met. She had come back, she said, because she had nowhere else to go. The house was full of Terran's things and she could not move them yet. The clinic was full of people who looked at her with a careful professional pity that she found, she said, somewhat more exhausting than the grief itself. They met in a common room 2 floors up from the ward, a room with large windows and some attempt at warmth, cushioned chairs, a low table, a plant that had been doing its best under insufficient lighting for several years. Cale had walked there under his own power, which Sorathi had allowed with the expression of someone who considers walking under your own power to be both medically premature and socially inevitable. Helena was sitting at the window with a cup of something hot. She looked at him when he came in and did not stand up. Her expression was not what he expected. He had expected grief, of course, and there was grief in it, a deep structural grief like a fault line running through otherwise solid ground. But there was also something else. Something that looked at first like anger and resolved itself, as he crossed the room toward her, into something closer to study. "You don't look anything like him," she said. "I know. I don't know why I expected you to." She looked back out the window. "Sit down, you're making me nervous." He sat. She did not look at him again for a while, and he did not push it. This felt right, not the patience of a young man waiting for something to happen, but the patience of someone who had learned, across decades of conversation, that silence was not empty, that it had weight and texture, and that you wasted it if you filled it too quickly. "Do you have his memories?" she asked, when the silence had settled enough. "Some fragments. They don't feel like memories exactly." More like, he thought about it, like knowing a song but not knowing where you learned it. The melody is there, but the afternoon you first heard it is gone. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What do you remember of him?" It wasn't quite a question. He considered it carefully. A desk. He was happiest at a desk, and he stopped. "And what?" "Brahms," he said. "String quartet. He used to play it while he worked. He didn't know the name of the piece, only how it went. Without fully intending to, he hummed a few bars, low, rough, from the back of his throat, the way you hum something you've known so long you've forgotten it has a name." Something happened in Helena's face that he didn't look at directly. He was not sure he was supposed to see it. "How long are you here for?" she asked after a moment. "Until they decide I'm stable." Then he shrugged. "I don't know, my life is somewhere else. The racing circuit, my mother, a cat that hasn't been fed." He paused. "I'm not him. I want to be clear about that. I'm not trying to." "I know you're not him." She said it quietly, without edge. "I knew that when you walked through the door. He had a way of walking that looked like he was perpetually about to arrive somewhere important. You walked in like you were looking for the exits." He found himself almost smiling at that. Old racing habit. "I know." She glanced at him briefly and then back at the window. "He left me his notes, his research, enough to finish the work, the next phase of the neural integration procedure. He was 3 years from a full solution." "Will you finish it?" She was quiet for a moment. "I have a doctorate in neurosurgical theory." Taryn didn't always remember that. A pause. "Yes, I'll finish it." Outside the window, the gray light was softening toward evening. Somewhere in the building, a door opened and closed. The plan on the table made its best effort. "Thank you," he said, "for coming back." "Don't," she said, not harshly. "I didn't come back for you." "I know," he said. "I came back for him. That doesn't mean it wasn't brave." She looked at him fully for the first time, and the look was complicated, layered, like something that had been assembled over a long time from many different kinds of feeling, and was only now being examined in the light. "Get some rest," she said. "They're going to run assessments tomorrow, and you'll need your brain working." "My brain," he said, and laughed a little, which surprised them both. The assessments took 3 days. De Sagnac ran them, a slight, precise man with the kind of hands that people who worked with delicate things always seemed to develop, as though the work gradually shaped the body around it. He had the manner of someone performing an experiment he was not entirely sure he wanted to see the results of. On the first day, he asked Cale to recall his own childhood. On the second day, he noted that several of Cale's autobiographical responses contained reference points that were not consistent with a human life on Drevin Station, but were consistent with a Valkai academic upbringing in the Northern Hemisphere. On the third day, he set down his data slate and said, quietly, "This is the most complete integration I've ever seen." "What does that mean?" "It means we don't fully understand what's happening inside your skull." He said it without apology. Scientists who operated at the edge of knowledge tended to lose the habit of apologizing for the edges. You're not Taryn Marsley, but you carry patterns of experience that were laid down across his lifetime, and those patterns are influencing your responses, your emotional associations, your implicit memory. He paused. "You will need to make peace with the fact that some of the things you don't know how you know." Cale thought about this. Will it get better or worse? Desagnac looked at him steadily. "We don't know. This is the first successful full integration. You're the data, Mr. Eckhart." He picked up his slate. "I'm sorry about that for whatever it's worth." "It's worth something," Cale said. On the evening of the third day, Marion came to see him. She was young, he kept noticing this, the youth of her, not because it surprised him but because it seemed to matter in a way he couldn't name. She had Taryn's eyes, not the color, which was her mother's, but the quality of attention in them, the way they settled on a thing and stayed there, that specific refusal to look away that characterized people who had grown up being right. "I'm not going to call you father," she said. She said it immediately, standing in the doorway, before she'd even fully committed to being in the room, as though she'd been building up to it and had decided to get it out of the way. "I wouldn't want you to," he said. She looked somewhat disarmed by this. She came in and sat down on the edge of the chair Helena usually occupied, and folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had prepared a speech for a conversation that was not happening. "I read your racing record," she said. "You were good before the accident." "I was 7th ranked in the circuit." "My father," she stopped, started again. Taryn was not a man who paid attention to racing. He thought it was a waste of biological capacity. He wasn't entirely wrong. This surprised a small laugh out of her, and she looked briefly, painfully young. She pressed her lips together and looked at the window, and he watched the effort of her composure with something that was not quite admiration and not quite sorrow and was, he thought, something that had no good name. "I don't know what I want from this conversation," she said finally. "That's all right, I don't need you to know." He was. Her voice had something in it now, something she was working to hold level. "He was the most extraordinary person I had ever known. He was also not a particularly good father. These two things were true at the same time, and I have spent a very long time trying to figure out which one was supposed to be more important." Cale said nothing. He had learned in these past days that silence was different from indifference. He waited. "He chose this," she said. "He chose to put himself somewhere else instead of staying. Even at the end, he found a way to not quite leave and also not quite stay." She looked at him then directly with the full force of that inherited gaze. "I need you to understand that I know that. I'm not going to make you responsible for it." "Thank you," he said. "I'm not doing it for you," she said. And then, after a moment, "He would have liked you, I think. You're not what he expected when he planned this." "What did he expect?" She thought about it. "He expected to feel like himself, I think. He expected continuity." She glanced at him. "He forgot that a body remembers things the brain doesn't, that you were in there too, that a person isn't just the pattern in the cortex." She paused. "I work in developmental neurology. It's the part of this he never quite took seriously." "He probably should have." Yes, she said, he probably should have. She stayed another hour. They talked about her work, about the integration research, about the way the northern treatment centers had been expanded in the last decade, and the political complications that came with Valkai medical policy, and the question of who exactly got to make decisions about the boundaries of personhood. They talked like two people discovering, with some surprise, that they had more common ground than they expected. They did not talk about Taryn again, and they did not need to. When she left, she paused in the doorway. "I'll come back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know," he said. On the 9th day, Sarathi declared him medically stable. On the 10th, the Hegemony Review Board arrived. There were 3 of them, in the particular kind of formal dress that administrative officials wear when they want to seem powerful without seeming threatening. Which is to say, precisely the kind of dress that makes people feel threatened. They were Valkai, all 3, and they carried with them the muted urgency of people who have been waiting for a problem to become too large to ignore, and have now reached the point where ignoring it is no longer professionally safe. The lead reviewer was named Ferrier. He had a face like a closing argument, sharp, considered, organized toward a point. "Mr. Eckhart," he said, in the tone of someone who has decided to use your name as a form of control, or perhaps we should say Mr. Marcelly, or something in between. He looked at his data slate. "I understand the ambiguity must be uncomfortable." "I've made my peace with it," Cale said. "Yes, well," a pause that was not quite a pause. "The Hegemony Medical Authority has significant concerns about the procedure that was performed here, not about its success, clearly it succeeded, about its implications." He set down the slate. "The question we are here to explore is a simple one. You carry within your biological substrate the neural patterns of a Valkai citizen, a scientist, a researcher whose work belongs, by the terms of his employment contract, to the Hegemony Research Institute. The question is, do those patterns and the knowledge contained in them belong to you as a human citizen, or to the Hegemony, as the employer of the man whose mind produced them?" The room was very quiet for a moment. "You're asking if they own his brain," Cale said. "We're asking," Ferrier said carefully, "about intellectual property rights in the context of neural transfer." "That's the same question. The law doesn't always acknowledge that similarity." Cale leaned back in his chair. He looked at Ferrier for a long moment, and then at the 2 other officials, and then at the window behind them, and at the gray northern light coming through it, and at the faint reflection of himself that the glass threw back, a young face, his own face, with old eyes, or at least eyes that had seen things his own years couldn't account for. "Here's what I know," he said. "I know how to fly a sled at 200 kilometers an hour across an ice surface with a 2-second reaction window and a 40% mechanical failure rate. I know that if you go into a left-hand turn carrying too much speed, you correct with the hip, not the hand, because the hand is too slow. I know that my cat's name is Smudge, and that she likes the kind of food that comes in a green packet and hates the kind that comes in a red one. I know these things because I lived them." He paused. "I also know, in a way I can't fully explain, and am not going to try to explain to a legal panel, the weight of a scalpel in a steady hand. I know the particular quality of silence in an operating theater when a procedure is going well. I know the shape of a research problem that has been turning in someone's mind for 17 years, and I know the satisfaction of being 3 years away from cracking it." He looked back at Ferrier. "But I don't know whose satisfaction that is, and I don't think you do either, and I think you know that you don't know, and that is what is making you nervous." Ferrier was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Eckhart." "No one owns a memory," Cale said, "not even the person who made it. Taryn Marcelly gave his brain away. He made that choice. Whatever was in it traveled with the gift. You can argue about the legality of the procedure, but you can't argue about the ethics of trying to extract intellectual property from a man who didn't exist when the property was created." "You did exist," Ferrier said sharply, Biologically, I was brain dead. Marginally. Then go find the margin and ask it who owns the memories. He kept his voice level, but there was something in him now, a heat, a stubbornness, that was entirely his own and had nothing of Taryn Marcelly in it. This was the part of him that had climbed back into the sled 6 times after crashes and was going to climb back in a 7th if he had to. The part that looked at a door and thought, exits. I am not a vessel. I am not a repository. I am a person who had a procedure done to him when he was incapable of consenting to it, and I woke up and dealt with it, and I will continue to deal with it. But I will not deal with the hegemony treating my brain as a piece of salvage. The silence afterward was the kind that committees produce when they have been told something they already knew and were hoping not to have said out loud. Ferrier picked up his data slate. "We'll need to confer," he said. "Take your time," said Cale. "I'll be here." They conferred for 2 days. During that time, Helena came to find him in the common room again, and this time she brought a flask, which she set on the table between them without comment. He recognized the label Vethian whiskey, the same as the half-finished bottle in his locker on Drevin Station. He looked at her. "Don't read too much into it," she said. "Taryn liked good whiskey, and so do I. It's the simplest overlap we've found." She poured 2 measures. "I heard about the session with the review board. Word travels. Costet talks." She pushed one of the measures toward him. "You know they're going to try again. They'll come back with different language. They always come back with different language." "I know. Do you have a plan?" He thought about it. "I'm going to go home," he said. "Back to Drevin, check on Smudge, talk to the Racing Corp about whether there's still a spot for me, and then," he stopped. "And then." He turned the measure between his hands. Outside, for the first time since he'd arrived, there was something like sunlight, thin and northern, but real, cutting sideways through the clouds and laying a pale stripe across the floor. "Taryn was 3 years from a solution," he said, "on the neural integration research. Helena said she'd finish it." "She will. I'd like to help." He looked up, not as a subject, not as a data set, as a person who has a rather unusual insight into the problem. He paused. "If that's something she'd be willing to consider." Helena looked at him for a long moment. "You understand that's strange?" "Yes." "You understand that she might say no?" "Yes." "You understand that the hegemony will use any involvement on your part as an argument for their ownership claim?" "They can try." He picked up his measure. "I've had worse fights." She picked up hers. They touched them together briefly, without ceremony, the way you do when a toast would feel like too much and not toasting would feel like too little. "Smudge," she said. "That's a terrible name for a cat. She has a smudge on her nose." "That's not a name, that's a description." "I was 20 when I got her. I wasn't a man of great nuance." Something in her face eased, just slightly, around the edges. Not the grief lifting. It didn't lift. It was the kind that wouldn't for a long time, but something settling into a shape that was slightly more livable than the shape it had been in before. "He would have called her something extraordinary," she said. "Something from a classical text. He named everything after classical texts. Even you." A pause. "Helena," she said. "He said he chose me for the name. I always suspected the reverse." She set her measure down. "Go home, Cale, take care of your cat, and if Marion agrees to the collaboration, come back. Bring the whiskey." "Deal," he said. The hegemony came back on the morning of the 12th day, with different language. They had, it seemed, spent their 2 days conferring not with each other, but with a panel of legal scholars, a neuroethics board, and this was the part that should have worried him but somehow didn't, 2 members of the hegemony's intelligence directorate. Ferrier looked different this time, not less formal, but less comfortable inside the formality. He had the look of a man who has received instructions he finds distasteful but intends to follow anyway, because the alternative has been explained to him in terms that made compliance seem very reasonable. The hegemony has reconsidered its initial position, he said. I know, said Cale. This derailed Ferrier briefly. You spent 2 days consulting people I don't have access to, and you came back looking worse than when you left. That usually means someone told you to push harder. He looked at the two new faces, the intelligence officials, who had positioned themselves at the back of the room with the careful casualness of people who want you to know they could stand somewhere more threatening if they chose to. Hello, he said to them. Neither of them responded. Mr. Eckhart, Ferrier said, returning to his argument, the hegemony is prepared to offer you a very generous research fellowship, full citizenship rights within the hegemony's jurisdiction, ongoing medical support, and a guaranteed stipend in exchange for your cooperation with the Neural Integration Research Program. And what does cooperation mean? Regular sessions, documentation of memory recall, availability for cognitive assessment, a controlled environment, a research environment. What's the difference? Ferrier's jaw tightened. The difference, he said, is in the terms of the agreement. Cale looked at him steadily. He had been racing since he was 16. He had sat across negotiating tables from Drevin Corp lawyers, who made these hegemony officials look like enthusiastic beginners. He knew what it felt like when someone was offering you something large in order to avoid offering you something simple. He knew that the largeness of the offer was usually proportional to the importance of the simple thing. I want it on the record, he said, that I am a human citizen, that I underwent an involuntary medical procedure, however well-intentioned, that I have adapted to in good faith, and that my ongoing existence as a thinking, experiencing, memory-holding person does not constitute a research resource for the hegemony, regardless of whose patterns of experience I also carry. The law hasn't caught up, he said. It doesn't always. That's not an excuse to run ahead of it in the wrong direction. He leaned forward. Here's my counteroffer. I will make myself available for voluntary consultation on my terms at my schedule in an ongoing research collaboration with Dr. Helena Marsali and Dr. Marion Marsali, not the hegemony's program. Theirs. I will do this because it matters and because I have something to contribute. I will do it as a participant, not a subject. And if the hegemony can accept those terms, we won't need the gentleman at the back of the room. Ferrier looked at him for a long time. You have no leverage here, he said quietly. Everyone has leverage, Cale said. Mine is simple. I'm a human citizen. If you detain me against my will, you have a diplomatic incident. If you compel my participation without consent, you have a legal case that your own neuroethics board will not be comfortable defending in public. The gentlemen at the back of the room know this. That's why they're at the back of the room and not the front. A long silence. One of the intelligence officials shifted his weight, the other did not. We will need to confer again, Ferrier said. You know where to find me, said Cale. He stood up, which was not part of the script, and walked to the door, which also was not part of the script, and opened it, which was very much not part of the script. He stopped with one hand on the doorframe and turned back, because something in him, the old thing in him, the new thing in him, the impossible combination of the two, had one more thing to say. He was a great man, he said. Taran Marsali. What he did, the work, the research, all of it was extraordinary. I know this not from reading his files. I know it the way you know something that has been inside you. And I intend to make sure that work continues and reaches the people who need it because I think that's what he would have wanted, and I think it's also the right thing. And I don't believe those two things are always the same, but I think this time they are. He paused. I'm going home to feed my cat. When you've made a decision you can actually live with, you know how to reach me. He left. On the 14th day, Dr. Sorathi walked him to the landing platform herself. This surprised him, and he told her so. Don't make it sentimental, she said. I want to see you walk without compensation gate. He walked across the platform without compensation gate. She watched him with a data slate, making notes that he suspected were not purely medical. You'll need check-ins, she said. Remote assessment at minimum quarterly. The integration can shift over time. We don't have longitudinal data. I'll come back. Quarterly. Quarterly, he agreed. She stopped at the ramp to the transfer shuttle. The gray light was doing something interesting with the ice fields to the north, turning them a shade of blue he didn't have a name for. He filed it in the category of things he would find himself stopping to look at now that he would not have stopped to look at before. One more thing, Sorathi said. She was looking at her data slate and he had the feeling she was not reading anything on it. The memory you have, of his. You said some of them come as feelings rather than events. Yes. Is there one that, she stopped, started again more carefully. Is there one that feels like a good one, that you'd want to keep if you could choose? He thought about it. He had not been asked this directly before. He let the question settle and waited to see what rose to meet it. There's one, he said slowly, that comes sometimes when I'm not thinking about it, an afternoon in winter, somewhere warm inside with the snow coming down outside a window, music playing Brahms, yes, the same piece, someone in the next room, a sense of, he turned his hands over looking for the word, a sense of things being for the moment in their right place. Sorathi made a note. Her face was very still. I think, she said carefully, that's not a memory of an event. I think that's a feeling he carried for a long time and never quite found the circumstances to match it to. Cale stood in the pale light with the name of a cat he needed to go feed and the weight of someone else's unclaimed happiness sitting quietly in the middle of his chest, and found that he had nothing useful to say about that at all. I'll be back in 3 months, he said. Quarterly, she said. Bring the file updates from any racing simulations. The reaction time data is relevant. You're going to want to study me forever, aren't you? Yes, she said without apology. Don't be flattered. You're scientifically unique, not personally remarkable. He laughed his own laugh, entirely his, nothing borrowed about it. He walked up the ramp and did not look back, and the shuttle lifted, and the ice fields fell away, and the gray-blue light went on doing its thing in the north without him. He fed Smudge. He rescued his lucky patch. He sat in the locker room at the Drevin Racing Corp facility with the reopened bottle of Vethian whiskey and a calm link to the Valdris Circuit Administrative Office, and had a long, complicated, eventually productive conversation about his future in professional sled racing. He called his mother. This was the hardest thing he had done since waking up. She said, "You sound different." He said, "I am different." She said, "Are you all right?" He thought about the desk and the scalpel and the winter afternoon and the Brahms and the weight of something he was carrying that had no name. "Yes," he said, "I think I actually am." She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, the specific quiet of a mother deciding whether to push or to trust. She had always been good at that choice. "Come home for a week," she said. "Your room is the same." He went. He stayed a week. His room was, in fact, the same posters, same racing trophies, same crooked shelf that had been crooked since he was 14 and would be crooked until the building fell down. He slept 8 hours a night, which was 2 more than he had slept in years. He went to the market in the mornings. He looked at the sky a lot. On the 6th day, a calm came through from Marion Marcelly, which he had been expecting, and he answered it with the door of his childhood room open and the smell of something cooking coming up from the floor below. "I've been thinking about the collaboration," she said. She was businesslike, which he respected. "I've talked to Helena. She's willing if you are. There are conditions." "State them." She did. There were 7. They were all reasonable. He agreed to 6 and countered on the 7th a question of scheduling and proximity, and they negotiated it to a position they could both accept. It took 11 minutes. She sounded afterward slightly surprised that it had gone well. "You're not what I expected," she said, which was, he was realizing, a thing the Marcelli women said when they were being honest. "Neither of you are what I expected," he said. "That's probably good." A short pause. "It is actually." Another pause. "Are you going to keep racing?" "Part-time. They've offered me a testing role. Less circuit time, more development work." He leaned against the doorframe. Taryn thought racing was a waste of biological capacity. Taryn was wrong about several things. She said it without heat, which was a different kind of honesty. "Come to the clinic next month. We'll start with the memory documentation protocol and build from there." "See you next month," he said. After the comm ended, he stood in the doorway of his childhood room for a while. Smudge came and pushed against his ankle, and he bent down and scratched behind her ears, and she made the sound she always made, which was not quite a purr and not quite a complaint but something stubbornly itself, in between. Downstairs, something was still cooking. The crooked shelf was still crooked. He had, improbably, been given someone else's life as a secondary inheritance, and he had, more improbably still, decided to do something useful with it. He thought about the unclaimed happiness, the winter afternoon and the music, and the sense of things being in their right place. He thought about it the way you think about something you've been handed that is too fragile to carry carelessly, and he decided, standing there with his cat in his childhood home, that he was going to try to find the circumstances that matched it. Not for Taryn, not for the hegemony, not for the research or the record or the data. For himself. He straightened up. He went downstairs. He had dinner with his mother, who asked him good questions and did not ask bad ones, and he told her most of what had happened, in the way you tell a person most of the truth when the full truth is still settling into a shape that can be spoken. Outside the window, the lights of Drevin Station moved in slow arcs across the dark, the way they always had, the way they would keep doing whether or not anyone was watching. A whole world carrying itself forward, people inside their lives. He had a brain full of someone else's unfinished work, and a body full of his own stubborn self, and a cat that needed feeding every morning and a lucky patch that was going back on his jacket, and a future that was, for the first time in 14 days, entirely his own problem. He thought that was probably enough to start with.